The whips and dissonant clangs of steel on steel rang across the courtyard and up the high black granite walls. The sunlit square of well-trodden cobblestone, flanked by elevated walkways standing strong on thick pillars, was currently inhabited by 3 figures. 2 facing each other from opposing corners of the courtyard's raised center, and 1 in solitude on the steps. The loner was craning over a seemingly ancient tome of once venerate decorum that looked as if its parchment might be torn asunder at the slightest breeze. His elegant black tabard cloak wreathed his lithe form in cool shadow, even amidst the blaze of midday that glinted off his silver chain sash and dragging skull brooch. From his left came the clattering and subsequent sigh of self-disappointment, characteristic of a swordsman disarmed.
I told you when you were but 9 winters, and I'll tell you again today. You're too slow, my liege.
The victor taunted with a deep-set smile. He kicked the grounded blade up to his hand and returned it to its owner. Knowing what was to come, the black-clad lector took note of his place and gently closed the book, replacing it with the scabbard lying unaffixed at his side. The eldest of the 3 continued.
You boys may be my graters, but you've yet to best me.
He made a wide arcing flourish with his own humble blade.
And you never will.
Rising from the steps to relieve the previous combatant, the young lord eyed his opponent as he trotted back to his own corner of the battlefield. The man was tall and strong, with cracked sun-worn skin and veins of gray creeping into his short beard and hair alike. He wore chainmail and a rough-hewn kama, despite the scorching heat, alongside studded leathers. His armored chest displayed the mark of the reigning court, much like the younger men, battered but still proud, in long faded red. His weapon, a simple steel arming sword, scarred from years of wear, too far gone to be mended, and bound to too much pride to be replaced, matched its bearer and the rest of his kit. The 2, eyes now locked in anticipation, could not be more distinct, save for the skeletal emblem they both bore. The younger, without breaking regal posture, crooked his head to one side.
Kneel.
The order came as a smirk crawled across his lips, seemingly pulled from his foe, whose grin had become quizzical disbelief.
Your pardon?
I commanded you to kneel, Lancia.
Talron obeyed with cautious curiosity, lowering one knee toward the earth.
There. I've bested you.
The aged man's smile returned with a conflicted look of admiration and chagrin.
Thy's a court rat, Evander.
Talron returned to his feet, shaking his head.
A damned good one.
Come now, I'm not your liege, but my dearest brother is.
Thy's a court rat, my liege.
Thou art not, thy is.
Brother, don't mock.
Boy, I've stood for the court with your father, his brother, and their father before him, and none of 'em gave a bone if I could talk your proper-spoken rubbish. The highborns'll fawn over you one day.
They already do.
The 3rd individual among them, a model of ivory white and shimmering gold, was a perfect mirror to his sibling. Lupis, the mite amongst the 2, bore a long, straight, ring-hilted blade of his same colors, though the day's scrapes and draws betrayed the blade's hidden steel construction. Gold was much too soft a metal for combat. The younger of the brothers by 2 winters, Lupis was oft-cited as his mother's son in both looks and heart, though such compliments only ever wrenched an ever-present knot below his lungs. He helped the trusted tutor back to his feet, and turned to his brother, who had since returned his scabbard to the ground and drawn back to his literature.
I never asked for their flattery.
And yet, you choose to speak instead of stand?
As any wise man would. A paladin to be ought to know that there's more to conflict than hacking limbs from flailing bodies, of which I believe I'm equally capable.
Were it your God-sworn charge, you couldn't hack a limb from my flailing body.
Oh?
Evander, it's a child's belief that all strife can be put to bed without swinging a sword. You know this.
Hear me not wrong, there's great value in the swing of a sword, but why swing my own when another can swing his in my stead?
Lupis now lay a hand on the hilt of his trusted blade and drew the first few inches. Evander had set the book aside to engage in the one pastime that brought him more pleasure.
Tell me, is your silver sharp as your wit? If you'll not quarrel with one beneath you, then have at me.
A chilling ring, like silver bells, sounded as the serpent of a rapier was at last released from its narrow, elegant cage.
Only to win on both fronts.
Evander met his brother's smirk with a grin of his own. Lupis may have succeeded in his game of 2 dimensions, goading his brother to duel. Evander's game, however, was played in 3.
Kekir Suro. Do it proper.
Each of the 2 in turn dropped their scabbards and ran their strong hand over their own blade, with just enough force to draw blood before assuming proper stance.
Been a while since you two have had a spar, hasn't it? What the court'd give to see this. Lucky me.
To the dirt.
To the dirt.
The brothers' blades were no strangers. They'd cut their teeth on each other, tangling in many a tournament, and to settle even more personal scores. Standing close, their blades hovering a hand's width away from one another, Lupis made the first move, opening with a feigning stroke.
You think a commander need not whet his steel?
Then a well-timed left thrust.
Forget you the battle of Grey Harrow's neck.
Evander, however, parried effortlessly, his blade quick and agile as its wielder.
It's not Grey Harrow's neck I concern over so much as my own.
The rapier came back around and lashed out towards Lupis's now unguarded forward leg.
You were 1 short of a dozen winters at the Battle of Grey Harrows. Your blade drank no blood.
The long sword had pulled its momentum around and batted its roguish counterpart away.
Play not the fool. You watched the charges from the same hilltop as I.
It came then for a crosscut to its true foe's shin.
It was our own father that broke Lord Aesir's vanguard and ended the rebellion before its 9th night.
Lupis pounced on his fleet-footed adversary, throwing forward a shoulder as Evander's leg rose to foil the strike.
His strength!
Aye, his strength is great.
Evander staggered back, recoiling to find his balance and refusing to be the first to the dirt. Lupis carried the motion forward, the tip of his blade raising a discordant roar as it tore across the stone toward a baneful upward stroke. Evander found his footing and stepped into a high kick, connecting with one arm and thwarting the Kirsu, the finishing blow.
And his deed worthy.
Lupis planted his feet like stalwart roots and gathered his blade to instead meet his foe's open hip. Evander twirled, and his eyes caught the motion as it launched. With a sweeping guard, the dancing silver set streaking gold off course, just enough to allow Evander a reposing step, then one of retreat.
But any centurion could have taken his place. War is a board game, brother, where I...
You speak of leadership, but you've never held command.
Lupis seized the opportunity with a high cleave. Evander sidestepped the strike, then again the whirling slash that followed.
A true sovereign, one that doesn't live in fear.
Another golden lunge.
One they sing songs of, takes up arms for his people.
Another near miss.
He wields the glory wrought on the battlefield because he serves his people, and should risk everything for them.
Lupis unleashed a deluge of blows that brought his foe to the brink, the very edge of the steps. The blades met low, near the hilt of the rapier, and caught each other in a bind.
Until he meets a wielder more skilled, and then it all comes tumbling down.
Lupis didn't realize his brother's Kirsu was set until it was already sprung. Evander slid the bind from his hilt to his debole, the building tension flexing the sword like the limbs of a bow. In one swift motion, he flipped his guard, the sudden release exposing his target. The blade snapped back to form behind Lupis's knee, buckling him. Evander danced round his off-guard opponent, and with the softest of jabs to his brother's back, sent him tumbling down the steps. The smiling elder sibling bowed to his imaginary audience, before returning his weapon to its sheath. Facing once more to Lupis, who lay limbs extended, flat on the stonework, staring blankly at the sky, as if still processing the flurry of motion that led to his fall.
Then who will inherit? Ah, yes, me. He who still has his head, or whoever took yours from you.
At last, rising to a seated position, and brushing the dust off his white garment.
And I'll be remembered as a hero.
Or a fool.
Well, I'm not training fools, so keep practicing. Lupis, you need to gather quicker tween your guard. Evander, it's a needle, not a club. Your high cuts should be aiming for the neck, not the head. I mean it. Wherever your father sends you tomorrow, find the time. Don't go thinking I'll miss you boys that much. But if you ever need to shine up, or your brother needs his ass kicked, I'll be at court, side his liege. Don't get out much these days.
The man blinked the welling water from his eyes and straightened up before continuing.
Wind be at your back. Sky knows it ain't at mine no more. Now get lost. I'll see you before you part.
Get lost, my liege.
Get lost!
Evander helped his sibling to his feet, collected his tome, and together the two set off into the underbelly of the citadel proper. The entire bottom floor and grounds were actually below the level of earth beyond the walls, despite being largely open to the sky. The intent of the original builders was unknown. Perhaps to make storming the keep itself more difficult should the walls ever fall, or, the keeper speculated, to be flooded by the tides of the Silver Sea. Regardless, it would never be known, as the whole place had been purged when it was taken from its original denizens too many generations ago. The brothers walked side by side through the network of corridors that would eventually lead them to the bases of the main keep and spire.
I hate when you argue stupid points.
It's not a stupid point. Not all lords nor masses can be swayed by force, even when you're sovereign.
Why do you keep saying that?
That's what I'm trying to explain, brother. Finesse.
No, you keep saying when you are sovereign. You're my elder. You're going to be named heir. If father were to...
Lupis, show me your arm.
Brother!
Evander grabbed his brother's sleeve and tugged him by the arm. The cloth drew back to reveal 3 imperfect, parallel lines of dark maroon, like elongated blood blisters running the length of the forearm. He then exposed the underside of his own right forearm, which bore not the same mark, but instead lay bare.
What's that?
Evander, you don't...
It's a god's mark. Who else has one?
That's...
Our father does, as did our grandfather, as did every sovereign before them.
You're the eldest. The court would never allow it. The Senate would be at arms by sunset.
Were it that simple, Akina would be heir.
That's different. She's a girl.
And our stepsister and a weaver, but she's still the eldest.
Lupis winced at the mention of sorcery, but Evander paid no mind. It was a conversation run into the ground, like banners beneath the charge of destroyers.
And I don't have a god's mark. Not so simple. If they don't name me, it's heresy.
And if they do, it's high sacrilege. Evander, do you want the throne?
Lupis, it's yours. Besides all else, you took the colors of compassion. I took justice. We're to lead very different lives. I'll be Master Corsair, or study with the Weavers, or be a Grand Tacticus of the Legion. A role that suits me.
Leading the Legion safely from some tower far over the horizons?
Aye, leading from the front will be your task.
Justly so. It was a stupid point.
You deal in absolutes.
Where do you think we'll be sent?
To deal with some squabbling daimyo. Border lords? Nothing fun.
So fighting's fun again.
It's different when they're not men. Or poor fighters.
Where would you want it to be?
Doesn't matter. 'Tis all to the same end. What would you have it be?
Something... An Ursus. A red maw. Or a devil in some desecrated ruin. Or a broken blade to be hanged. Or a rogue arcanist.
I enjoy picturing the increasingly horrendous ways in which we would be slaughtered by each of those.
You underestimate us.
You underestimate the beasts. An Ursus.
Aye.
They'd never venture south of the spine.
Fine then. A dragon.
Wouldn't that be a final sight?
You don't believe in them?
They're extinct.
Not so.
Effectively.
We could take it.
Ha! An egg, maybe.
The long, low, reverberating ring of immense bronze bells began to sound through the corridor. The sun had begun its fall, and the praetors and saints of the court were to sup beneath its radiant glow on this night before tomorrow's sacrament. The brothers, however, would fast, drawing whatever sustenance they might need from their divine lords, and their own determination alone. Come the morning, Evander and Lupis would venture forth and return as champions. or die trying. The rights of paladinship were reserved for the so-said descendants of the gods and the most revered and pious of Lancia, a prestige nigh unattainable to any other. The opportunity to serve as the eyes and hands of the Obsidian Court throughout and beyond its borders. In place of the anticipated excitement and nerve, both brothers had noticed something off in each other, though neither addressed it here and now. They merely parted ways for the night, each to lay awake, isolated and tormented by his own thoughts and apprehensions. Lupis found nothing odd about his brother's despondency, but Evander's hunger led him outside Estabarrow's city walls at even the slightest of excuses. His dispassion for the coming trial was acutely unlike him, but Lupis was consumed by the very thing his ever-perceptive sibling had also picked out. Inflamed was his regular zeal. The way in which he spoke of glory was unkind as he had ever been, an attitude irreconcilable with the good-heartedness for which he was known. Before finding sleep, Lupis laid a collection across his floor. Swords, about a dozen of them, forged of iron, and each in various states of disrepair. 8 years' worth of training, of practice and preparation to join the ranks of the Lancia, and 4 more since. He set down, too, his latest arm. As he ran the small whetting stone against the golden-plated blade, its fellows lay still and cold. Honing the edge was his responsibility alone, a rite sworn solemnly his 16th winter when his father had presented him the only gift he would ever bestow. A lancia is their weapon. When they take their oath and choose their colors, the blade they hold is to be the one they wield for the rest of their life, their true sword, an extension of not only body but soul and intent. Lupis did not often retrieve his old arms. Evander mocked that keeping them at all was childish, but tonight he felt compelled. Each worn weapon had been a stepping stone, and now he stood at the pinnacle. He would do right by his father, the will of the gods, he who had given him everything, and called now for the debt to be honored. Lupis knew, with iron-clad heart, he would not fail. The sun had long since set when a tired yet restless Evander rose from his sheets. He stood at the open window, adjacent to a pair of chests, and across from a study that ordinarily hid its quill-scratched face beneath a dozen notes and pages torn from books. But those parchments now found themselves neatly tucked away in scroll cases, or between the pages of other tomes that were to accompany their curator on his voyage. The room was lit only by the eerie opalescence cast by the 3 moons, each almost full, that formed a tight triangle amongst the endless sea of stars. The young Lancia held in his uneasy hands the book that had infatuated him for the last 9 nights. The work bore the name Uri Tuisha Maye, Old Keta Eku, the language of a bygone era predating reliable sources of history, before the first court rose against the servants of the mother gods. Instead of fact, this relic of a tongue brought forth tales of tyrants, monstrosities, and powerful Manaic arts. Bits and pieces of the text had been translated by visiting savants and the local keepers, though it was largely incomplete. What was there was at best confusing, and at worst cryptic, for the written hand was lost to time, though Evander seized and scrutinized every detail he could. It was a compilation of folk tales and mystic lore, which the author had then deconstructed, explaining how corpse-eaters and grave-walkers were simply cannibalistic and malnourished madmen. Hellhounds were feral wolves, and devil-skins. Tieflings were the people of a secluded far western culture that wore animal horns and body paints to appease their false god. By his account, even the greater Manaic arts were not what they seemed, merely illusions, tricks the masses had been made fool to, a grand deception to inspire awe and terror. The writings had fascinated Evander, making sense of and cutting through the tall tales of the world that he'd been sold all his life. Thus, he'd sought out more works of this Ikrios Araxes, only to be informed by Keeper Ateus that the name was unfamiliar to the library keepers and all visitors to whom it had been mentioned alike. The tome, he explained, had been seized from a zealous sect of heretics in the near north of the Willed Bad and taken into the keeper's custody only for the sake of historical preservation. This was, of course, many years ago, Attius had assured, and pointed Evander toward the histories of the Argent Crusade, insisting that those books would serve him much better than whatever nonsense these scrawlings contained, for it was agreed the text was of no academic value. Frustrated but intrigued even further, Evander began the arduous process of decoding more of the writing himself, transcribing what scraps he could into the leather-bound and strung notebook he'd been given by his mother long ago. The work seemed impossible at first, against foreign characters, complex sentence structure, and unfamiliar, dated vernacular, but Evander had since begun to pick out individual words, if only based on their illustrations. Much to his dismay, this didn't further his ambitions in any meaningful way. From the translated texts he did have access to, Evander had been carefully planning and preparing various salves and collecting an assortment of items that he believed might have more practical use against what they may face than what the keepers had recommended. These legends of the fearsome wild had apparently grown deep roots in the minds of the land. In the peasantry and farm folk who would proclaim a demon any beast they didn't recognize, and alike in the keepers and weavers and learned kinds who studied such phenomena from the reports of others in their guarded towers, and then passed on their conclusions, under the guise of fact, to their highborn. This truth was one Evander had long persisted. It is the vagrant, not the savant, to whom you should lend your ear, for he has seen the world's secrets with his own 2 eyes. He flipped through the pages to one annotated, Devils, that was accompanied by some of the tome's most gruesome visual depictions. Men who gouged their own eyes, peeled away their skin down to the musculature, or wore nothing but edged chains that had ingrown and festered across the body. The horrors continued on the next page. An Echin-blooded man, tall, strong, and covered in geometric tattoos, wearing a bison's skin as a cloak. The horns seeming to protrude from his own head, screaming as he burned alive on the battlefield, a sickly, jagged weapon in each hand. Madness, derangement, the blood plague. The truths behind such fictions, Evander found far more unsettling than the common tale. Lupis, he thought, would never trust such tellings. Even if Evander could prove the legitimacy of these claims, it'd break his brother's heart to have the weight of the world's cruelty come crashing down on his romantic views. There'd be time enough for that when he took the throne. No special way to kill these abominations, dictated the book, save for steel. No divine prayers, or holy oils, or dusts of salt, for these were not, so said the author, but the machinations of clerics, blinded by devotions. More of the withered pages fluttered past his thumb, coughing up dust into the rays of still white, until the true focus of Evander's fixation gripped him like a vice. At the back of the tome, a dozen pages or so moved together as one brittle piece. They were all stuck together by some long-set, deep brown resin that left them inseparable, without the risk of destroying their contents. After days of carefully prying and peeling, dripping water and redrying, Evander had exposed the second page, though the next, he guessed, would be much more difficult, if not impossible. The revealed page that now headed the block held a new denomination, Ishkato Surigo, and a drawing of a helm that left only the center of the face and the eyes exposed in an upturned T-shape. The mandibular plates were detailed with formless patterns that wove amongst each other. As Evander stared idly at the image, trying to decipher what significance it could possibly hold, the patterns seemed to move. The lines and shapes writhed like distant figures, waltzing in hazy shadow. Enraptured by the apparent trick of the light, he altered his gaze, and intently he stared at its unmoving details. The intricate and finely crafted, paradoxically chaotic design. The helm simply stared back. He returned the text to the windowsill and rubbed his eyes. Insomnia was known to do strange things to the mind. He held a hand up to his light source and watched as his fingers trembled gently, before clenching them into a fist in an effort to regain control. Evander was keenly aware of the coalescing nerves in the pit of his stomach, but even as he searched his heart, he couldn't pin them all to a single source. He pulled a thick cloak from the wall, wrapped it around himself, and with all the gingerness of a thief, unlatched the door in absolute silence. As a boy, he found it necessary to determine the quickest and least watched routes about the keep in dead of night. Despite the fact that he could dismiss the guards at the wave of a hand in his current status, he both enjoyed the challenge, if it could even be titled so anymore, and appreciated the solitude his old ways granted. Ascending the spiral steps that wound their way skyward, Evander was privy only to the sounds of wind whistling through the narrow passage. Arriving at the top of the bell tower, the citadel's tallest peak, he was greeted by the same silky glow of the 3 moons that lit his room. Lurim, Zavala, and Sisi, the parents of the gods that ever watched the world, presided in eternal slumber as they drifted across the sky. One small and pristine, one much larger and egregiously scarred, and the third somewhere between its compatriots in size, shattered into 100 shards while still maintaining some semblance of its circular shape. Tomorrow, all 3 would align, and daylight would reign, even in the depths of night, the Zizigi. Evander thought back, 2 years ago, to the night he'd approached his father, Sovereign Damascus III, about his paladinship. He was to be recognized, the year of his 20th winter, as the sons of a sovereign are to be, and yet the last Zizigi of the year had come, and there had been no such talk or preparation. From atop his throne in the great court, his lord and father had explained that he wished for his sons to undergo the rites together. It was this day Evander knew he would never rule his father's empire, that it was instead the destiny of his brother, and tomorrow it would be so. Damascus would renounce the heirship of his lord regent, and decree it had been earned by Lupis, his god-marked son, to be claimed upon his return to the Obsidian court. Evander stood with the summer's end wind washing over him, and drew up the sleeve on his right arm once more. The paler underside facing toward the sky, he ran the thumb of his left hand down its length. His head fell in tandem with the pang of shame, as he felt what was seldom visible to the eye any longer. 3 long, parallel scars in the same place he'd seen the marks of his brother and father. The foolish hopes of a child, living in a falsely simple world. Casting his gaze over the sprawling city of Estabarrow below, the Empire's beating heart, and the silver sea beyond, towers reaching for the heavens, arcing bridges, and many-sailed ships created a horizon starkly opposing their surroundings. Evander couldn't oppose the thought that crept in. Lupis was the golden sword he carried, much too soft
to rule.